Today we're going to be installing this dash cam into a Pathfinder and a Toyota Corolla Cross. I purchased this dash cam off of Amazon. It was $69. I also purchased the additional wiring kit, which you can see to the left. I believe it was about $25. All in all, I had a dash cam with 4K hardwired into the car and a reverse camera for under $100. The kit came with these stickers that you put on the window and then stick the camera to. I went with a camera that stuck to the window instead of a suction cup because suction cups are always so reliable. The camera's pretty small. It's tucked behind the right side of the mirror. You can't even see it while driving. In this package, it does have the kit to wire directly into the cigarette lighter, which I chose not to use, obviously. It also has some pieces where you can hide the wires, a screwdriver so you can pull out the SD card, and some extra sticky pads in case you want to mount it on a different car or in case you mess up. It also comes with this orange trim tool. I started off by just routing the wire. I kind of tucked it up underneath the ceiling and just routed it in a direction towards the fuse box. In this Pathfinder, the fuse box is under the hood. In some cars, the fuse box is under the driver's left knee. In some of them, they're in the glove box. You'll just have to find your own. What I wanted to do first was get an idea of how these wires were going to be routed and to make sure I had enough. Incidentally, I had plenty of wiring, so that was good. Next, I plugged it in. I wanted to double check the placement. I need to make sure that I didn't get that black sunscreen in the view. You can see through that blue tint though. Now it's time to tuck the wires away. I used this tool just to pull the carpet away from the ceiling. It didn't take very much energy. Once you get it going, you can definitely feed it through. Sometimes I use the tool and sometimes just my fingers. Here I'm using the tool to pull the interior away from the carpet. Again, once you get it started, it's not too hard. The camera's a little shaky only because I don't have 3 hands. Here I got it started, and now you can see how it just pops right in. You can use your finger or the tool, either way. I used the smaller end of the tool to get it around that corner. Next, I'm peeling away a little bit of the weather stripping. You can pull the weather stripping off the metal if you want. Some cars are easier than others to do this. I'll show you later on how to pull it apart, but here I could just tuck the wire under the weather stripping and just feed it all the way down. This was easier than I thought it was going to be. Here you can see where I just pulled the weather stripping apart, started feeding it into a groove. Again, the weather stripping just holds onto that piece of metal. I decided to drill a little pilot hole so that the wire wouldn't get chafed when I pushed the weather stripping back onto the metal. That metal's a little sharp. Afterwards, you can just push it all back on and it stays right there. Now I'm going to lay the wires in the box and start working to get it around the trim. Here you can see you got 3 wires. The black is the ground. You've got a yellow and a red. The manual says that the yellow is for constant on. It took me a little while to figure out which wire went where, to be honest with you. These jumpers came with the wiring kit. They work like a charm. The only thing you have to be careful of is you can't put 2 side by side. So you'll have to pick fuses that are away from each other. They also have all the different size fuses, so it doesn't matter what kind of fuse box you have. It took me a few times to figure out which fuses were on 100% of the time and which fuses were only part of the accessories. This is where I'm planning to screw the ground wire into the frame. It didn't take much effort. Now we've got a lot of cord left over. And I still want to make sure that I have enough for the camera. I also have to feed it a little bit in between the A-pillar and the fender. I used my pry tool. You can get a little bit of wire in there. It's pretty forgiving. I was careful not to squeeze the wire though. You don't want to damage it. The wire fit in part of it, but I'm going to need a little help for the backside. Here you can see I pulled it apart just a little bit with a large screwdriver. There was no damage here. I was pretty gentle. Now I've got this cord. I know it's white on a black background. I'm going to try to hide it somehow. I don't think anybody would notice, but I definitely know it's there. Everything else is tucked away nice and secure. I plugged it in. The first step here is to format the SD card. So I hit the OK button on the bottom and let it do its thing. The problem I had now was that the camera was constantly on, and it needed to only be on in the accessory mode. You can see that there's no key. I pulled out one of the wires and it's still on. Now it's cutting off. That's a good thing. I finally found the right configuration for the circuit breakers. Now I'm going to clean the window and attach this film to the window and then attach the camera to the film. Again, double checking the placement. You can see a little bit of the black in the top right side. I'm going to have to move it a little bit. Yeah, I'm not a fan of that. I'm going to have to move that over to the right some so that we don't block a corner. It is pretty good looking though, nice and slim, and it takes good pictures. Now it's time to hide that wire. I'm going to pull this access panel out. I used a Velcro zip tie just to give the wire somewhere to attach to. It's difficult to do with one hand, but I think you can see where I'm going with this. Now we'll pop that back in there, and that wire will stay nice and secure. I may choose to hide this with some white tape later. I'm not sure yet. Now let's take a look at the backup camera. The backup camera came with plenty of wiring. I was a little worried about that, but there's more than enough. There's also a quick disconnect at the camera end, so that if you need to feed the wire through something unexpectedly, you don't have to try to fit that camera through a small hole. That's pretty helpful. It attaches just like the front camera, using double-sided tape that's provided. This 3M tape is pretty sticky too. If your rear window slides down, or if you have a hatch and a deck lid, you may have to stick it to the plastic in the back, and not the glass. Again, we're going to route these wires pretty much the same way, only this time we're going to stay up along the top side of the frame. We're going to go behind the gasket, behind the plastic, behind another gasket, behind some more plastic, and all the way to the back. You can kind of see here how I laid out the wires. There was plenty of left over. This is a smaller SUV, so if you had something larger, like an Escalade or a Sequoia, it would still fit. Now we start tucking the wires just like we did for the power cord. It's a little difficult to get it started with one hand. I just followed the same path for the first few feet. Again, tucking it into the plastic using the trim tool that they provided. It's a little hard with one hand. You'll see it for it better in a second. There we go. Once I got it started, it just popped right in there. Now we're going to go behind the weather stripping, but this time we're going to go up and over the door. I decided not to pull the weather stripping off. Instead, I just fed it through with my finger. You can't even tell. Here's how it looks so far. Nice and clean. You can't see it under the weather stripping. Now we've got some more plastic trim, and we're just going to do like we did the first time. Pull the trim apart just a little bit, and tuck it behind there. The carpet on the ceiling is pretty soft, so there's definitely some give. And we're back to the weather stripping now. This is pretty easy so far. I was a little worried when I was starting this project, but honestly, it was one of the easiest things I've done. I think it took me more time to actually clean up the mess than it did to run these wires. So far so good, looking really clean. I was pretty happy with this. The most difficult part of this job was putting it on the back window. I'm going to have to run this wire over this metal and get it to attach to the rear deck lid without compromising it. I'm not sure if I'm going to mount it on the plastic or on the glass. I may go for the plastic this time. I can pull the ceiling apart just a little bit, so I'm going to try to run it underneath the ceiling until I get to this black piece, and then I'm going to run it up into the plastic. I may end up pulling this plastic off and running it behind. That's not a big deal either. Here you can see I ran it under the ceiling, and I still have plenty of cord left. I'm going to have to find some place to hide that. I went ahead and disconnected the camera from the quick disconnect. I thought about feeding it through that plastic tube, but honestly that was going to be a real pain. I did decide to pull it from the other side of the weather stripping though. I didn't think it was too visible, so I used some Velcro straps just to secure it to that tube. You can pop those things off if you want, I just didn't feel like messing with it. Now it's time to pull the trim off. The trim is held on with clips. It wasn't too hard. I got my pry tool under there and just popped the clips. You just have to be careful not to bend it. My plan is to run this wire behind this plastic trim and then secure the camera to the trim underneath the third brake light. That's what it's going to look like in the end. I went ahead and stuck the camera on there. I lined up the lens with the very middle of the third brake light. That way I know it's centered. This does rotate, so you can make sure to get the right angle. You can see how I've ran the cord behind the trim. I basically pulled the trim off and ran it behind there. There's the piece of trim and the 4 clips. Now I've got some place to hide this wire. I think I'm going to hide it in this hole. I had to put the trim back on so that I could get the right amount of wire coiled up. Here's how it looks in the end, and I tucked it all inside that metal frame. It's a pretty clean install. You can see the wires, but it's not horrible. Thanks for watching.